Conflict theory. This is Carrie Miller. Social workers may be involved in the conflict and may be called upon to resolve the conflict. Conflict can be a signal that change may be possible. Values and ethics guide social work practice, and social workers are required to advocate social and economic justice. Social workers are sometimes called change agents. Social workers learn that conflict may be inevitable but can have good outcomes. Defining conflict theory. Conflict theory is more of a perspective than a theory. It is a large view and can be widely applied across systems, but it does not have a step-by-step plan. Therefore, it may vary in application and is difficult to measure. Conflict theory is analytic and descriptive. Its assumptions help social workers to understand what is driving a conflict. The practice principles of conflict theory include Principle 1, conflict is inevitable. Principle 2, there is an unequal distribution of power in relationships. Principle 3, there is an ongoing struggle for scarce sources. Principle 4, whoever has the most power controls the distribution of resources.
With Magyar, and I will be discussing practice settings within the conflict theory. For a social worker, conflict theory can be seen in all of our usual practice settings mentioned above. Down below are certain conflicts we see in the practice setting on a daily basis. For example, in man versus self, in the practice setting, the social worker might set up QPR training to better help staff question, persuade, and refer an individual's suicidal ideations. In man versus man, the social worker might be responsible for setting up a county health program to help disadvantaged families learn about and obtain proper parenting skills for a mother in jeopardy of losing custody of her children. In man versus society, the social worker might provide after-school activities to help children stay safe after school. In man versus nature, in the practice setting, a social worker might be responsible for establishing a free local clinic to help the undeserved members of society displaced because of a flood, hurricane, fire, etc. In man versus machine, the social worker might provide local workshops to guide the unemployed through the process of applying for a job when the individual does not have technological aptitude to compete in the job market. And finally, in man versus fate, the social worker might work with the Center of Disease Control and local government agencies to stop the spread of a communicable disease originating in a local group home. Settings with diverse client systems in conflict theory continued, Sheridan Aaron. Conflict theory posits that one side of the conflict has more power and that the other side is vying for the scarce resources. We find conflict within the household in the form of marriages and parent-child relationships, in communities and schools, in the workplace, and within the daily constraints of established law and society. In the practice setting, we might encounter issues between a male and female in a romantic partnership or in the workplace. We see issues that exist in part due to cultural disagreements or misunderstandings such as Mexican immigrants attempting to improve their families' lives while American workers wish to prevent their own economic advantages from being diminished. Clinically, or at the macro level, more traditional contrarian conflicts such as members of the LGBTQ+ community and the religiously charged institutions are fighting over rights based on strong convictions, or simply the conflict we see between different ethnic groups that may take the form of casual racism, such as white individuals confining people of color to stereotypes with jokes, daily exchanges, and by supporting certain social norms. Theory and macro practice. Nicole. Conflict theory was originally thought of as a macro practice theory. In our economy, there is unequal distribution of resources. Social workers have to fight the unequal distribution of wealth through advocacy and lobbying for those in need. Certain organizations take advantage of employees, and we also have to advocate for those exploited. The social worker must create programs that will allow employees to develop skills and seek other employment options, while working through interpersonal conflicts in the workplace. Conflict theory will always resonate when inequalities in society create natural conflict between classes. In mesopractice, Nicole. In conflict theory at the mesopractice level, the social worker might deal with family conflict where teenagers and parents feel a sense of inequality. It can be resolved through the use of communication and explanation of consequences of actions. However, the teenager will feel the lack of power over their parents. At the mesopractice level, the social worker might deal with bullying at different practice settings. And it is important to note that bullying occurs when a bully feels they have power over another person. It occurs when a person feels another person is different, and the best way to address this is to show the bully how the actual amount of power is held. And limitations of conflict theory, Sarah Johnson. Conflict is something that people experience throughout their whole life. Some researchers even say that we are experiencing conflict before we are even born. With conflict comes the need to compromise or to reassign power, which is done with the help of the social worker. While we can identify the principles of conflict theory in almost any adverse situation, it is not as easy to resolve these problems. For example, are police officers exerting too much power when pulling over people in known crime neighborhoods? How does a mediator know that a chosen intervention is appropriate? Is the mediator an expert on the issue? How does the mediator know the intervention will establish a balance of power and not give too much power to the other side? Social workers who are going to use conflict theory in their practice should make sure that they are not experiencing any bias, so that they are not putting too much power on one side of the conflict and strive to ensure that the conflict remains balanced. Conflict theory strengths include: it can be widely used, can be normalized, can be used in practice, and conflict can lead to change, and could be used to help the individual examine the dynamics of power in their relationship. Limitations include: interventions used can vary, it is difficult to evaluate, and could cause power imbalance. Hello, the group participants for this presentation on conflict theory include Sheridan Aaron, Nicole Agan, Sarah Johnson, Elizabeth Magyar, and Carrie Miller.